Ah yes, the 1960s, a crazy time to be alive. The Vietnam War was raging, hippies were drugging and fucking their brains out, the Beatles and Rolling Stones slept with half the world's population and probably fathered enough children to fill a country, and a massive time loop kept repeating the same day over and over again, turning people into mass murdering maniacs. Creative and interesting titles I've ever played. It clearly falls into the same category the Bioshock and Dishonored games fall, which I like to call Bio-Honored. Deathloop has been created by the same developers behind the Dishonored series. It is a spiritual successor to Dishonored, just like Dishonored is a spiritual successor to Bioshock. That doesn't mean that these games are the same, in fact they are quite different, but they share enough aspects to clearly fall into the same category. The general combat layout, for example, is the same across all three franchises, meaning in one hand you hold a sword or some kind of other weapon, while in the other you have a magical ability. Or rather, in Dishonored and Deathloop it's magical, while Bioshock explains it through sci-fi logic. Either way, it's the same. In all three games you have audio logs or audio recordings from characters that you can find around the world and listen to, fleshing out the lore or backgrounds of locations, characters, or events. Another thing all three have in common, which in my opinion is probably the most important aspect, is the unique art direction and design they share. Despite taking place in completely different worlds and time periods, they are all filled with an immense amount of attention to detail that makes these worlds feel real and alive. In Bioshock you can see lots of different posters advertising movies, plasmids, live shows or services like you would have seen in a real 1940s and 50s city. The design of Rapture is Art Deco and it sets the tone from the very moment you step foot inside the city. The immense structures looming above you and everything being bigger than it has to be, perfectly representing the economic boom and mindset of the people of that time. In Dishonored, the steampunk aesthetic will hit you from the get-go, be it the first or second game. Walking around Karnaca, you will be seeing architecture that is Victorian yet slightly too modern to actually be from that time era. There is a clever mix of technological advancement that is mixed with buildings, interiors, and even fashion from the Victorian era. Interiors are handcrafted by the developers and filled with details such as paintings related to the world or city, different furniture and objects that never make you question whether they actually belong there, because of how good a job the game makes at making the world believable. Out of all these games, Deathloop feels like the most creative and interesting in terms of art direction and design, and at the same time like the most lacking one. It sounds like a contradiction, and for a long time I didn't know how to explain this. Because on one hand, I feel like no other current game manages to be as original and creative as Deathloop, but then I also feel like Deathloop wasn't able to fully shine and live out its potential. Deathloop is a time loop game. You have to relive each day multiple times, being trapped in a never-ending loop and, as the name suggests, constantly dying or at the threat of death. You can die twice without the loop setting back, die a third time, and you wake up at the beach in the morning again, almost like after a hangover. The great thing about the time loop is that you can explore the areas as often as you like, and over time get so familiar with them that you'll be able to achieve full mastery of them. There are 4 areas and all of them change in their appearance and difficulty depending on multiple factors. Depending on the time of day during the loop, each area will look different. In the morning, for example, most of them will be clean, organized and quiet, with most inhabitants, called Eternalists, being rather sleepy. In the night, on the other hand, some areas you were able to visit during the day will be closed off, while others will be free to visit. The streets will be littered with broken bottles and garbage, and the Eternalists will be drunk and partying. The difficulty can also vary greatly, as it is tied to a mechanic called loop stress. Basically, each level has one or multiple visionaries. These are story-relevant characters that you have to kill, and not just kill, but kill them in one single loop. The more visionaries die, the harder each level will become. all of a sudden you will see mines lying around the map or being hidden, lasers blocking paths, trying to stop you, and the Eternalist will be much more aware, careful, and on the lookout for you. Loop stress will also impact how you play the game and how you navigate the maps. Arkane Studios are masters at creating maps that not only look graphically and design-wise amazing, but are also filled with lots of attention to detail and bits and pieces of lore-relevant information. One of the reasons their games have such a high replay value is the fact that no matter how thoroughly you explore a particular area, chances are you likely won't find all the hidden details, Easter eggs, or audio logs. Audio logs and documents especially are things that Dishonored, Deathloop, Prey, and Bioshock manage to place and hide so well that you won't get around missing some of them. I was recently playing a level in Deathloop that at this point I have seen dozens of times, during all times of day. I was sure that I had found everything there was to be found and that I had collected all the information there was. And yet, while sneaking around in the library, in a corner hidden between some furniture, there was another audio log with character relevant information. This immediately made me wonder how much I have missed in general. And I love it, because this is exactly how I imagine replay value to look like. This also means that your first and second playthrough won't be the same and you will be able to experience the game differently and in a new light, as now you have potential information that completely changes your view of a certain character or location. Unfortunately, even with all this information lying around, the game does a surprisingly bad job in fleshing out the world and explaining the lore. The game takes place on an island called Black Reef that is trapped in a constant loop that starts every morning again, or when you die for the third time during one run. When exploring the island, you can't help but wonder who built all of the buildings, why they chose this island to do so, who lived here before all the Eternalists and before the loop began, and so on. You as a player have many questions, but unfortunately only a handful of those will be answered, even if you 100% the game with all the information and data there is to be found. Now, I understand that one reason for this is probably that the game developers wanted to keep an air of mystery. They wanted to have this mysterious island vibe and felt like explaining everything would take away from the experience. I get that, but the lore that is available is too bare bones and barely explains anything. I've spent over 50 hours playing this game and I still wouldn't be able to tell you what the point of the loop is or where Black Reef actually lies. Is it an independent island? Is it part of the motherland? This is one of the areas where Deathloop is not able to reach the same level of depth as Dishonored because there simply isn't that much depth to be found here. In Dishonored, you have a massive amount of lore in the form of in-game books, audio logs, newspapers, diaries, etc. And while Deathloop has many of these elements, they rarely contain anything not mission relevant, meaning usually what you will read or hear is related to the plot, but not the actual world. That, in my opinion, is a wasted opportunity to create a truly unique setting. Because, let's be honest, such games live and rely heavily on the setting they take place. For many players, myself included, the actual location is a selling point and even more important than everything else the game has to offer. For example, do people really remember Bioshock for its gameplay? No, they remember it first and foremost for its insane and beautiful location, Rapture. They remember the Atlantis-like city deep under the sea. Another problem comes from the fact that a lot of the lore that you can find is often hidden in such a way that most gamers won't find or see it. There is a side quest where you have to go through a series of events to obtain a series of codes to open some apartment doors and a bunker. The apartments and the bunker contain very important and crucial information that is not only important for a better understanding of the story, but also has a lot of useful mission relevant help that will make your playthrough much more comfortable. But the game doesn't tell you anything about the side mission or where to find it unless you come across it by yourself, which is not easy to do if you don't know where to look for it. In fact, most gamers probably won't find it, or if they do, only complete it after they are done with the story. And that's a problem, because a lot of the information in this side quest actually feels like early game stuff that is designed to help you have an easier time getting into the game and learning more about your enemies and the locations. So it's even stranger then that all of that seems to be hidden from the players. The story in Deathloop is very interesting and intriguing, but it fails to make you sympathize with any of the main characters or even the main protagonist, Colt. I like Colt, I really do. I think the man is a badass and hilarious most of the time. But the game never really lets us get to know him properly. Most of the information about him is very thin and often vague. There aren't many games that have a time loop mechanic, which makes this genre, if you want to see it as a separate genre, still very fresh and unique. There are only a handful of time loop games and not all of them are great. This means that the potential and possibilities for future games in this genre are very promising and big. One of the reasons why Deathloop is so original is the fact that even if you loop 100 times, which many players probably will, you will still be able to find new ways to approach your objective. Some people compare Deathloop to Hitman because in both games, to really master a level, you first have to play through that level many times. It's a trial and error process where you will most definitely first fail multiple times before finally pulling off the perfect murder heist or whatever you set out to do. Now, in Hitman, each level has a beginning and end. When you finish a level, you have to start it again, as well as the particular story of that level. In Deathloop, on the other hand, while you could say that there is a beginning and end, whenever you load into a new area, you don't have to replay the story of that area, as Colt retains his memories. So all the information you find in the level stays with you and doesn't have to be obtained again. Now, the real question here is whether the concept of the time loop is repetitive in its nature or not. Time loops may seem like they are always the same, but in truth, they are not. A character has to relive the same day over and over again, but his actions within that day usually change all the time, assuming he is aware of the fact that he is trapped in a time loop. This is the perfect setting for a video game because it gives developers almost unlimited creative freedom. I think there has to be made a distinction between the type of repetitiveness you experience in a game with the Ubisoft formula, for example, versus a time loop like is seen in Deathloop. Even though you are constantly reliving the same day in the same place, as a player, to actually experience all Black Reef has to offer, it would take you many hours. Now, naturally, a lot of people will be assuming that since you loop all the time, you have to do the same things over and over again. This is completely false and at the same time completely true. As I've already mentioned, since Colt remembers everything you collect, all that data will be stored in a special section in the menu. The interesting part here is how, after playing the same levels for the 100th time, you as a player start getting more and more aggressive in your playstyle. At first, you probably were trying to sneak around, maybe you've played the Dishonored games before and got used to playing them quietly like a shadow. But after a while, you slowly start realizing that it doesn't matter because the day will loop again anyway, and all these NPCs you killed quietly will be back, doing the same things. And since there is no chaos system that impacts the world, it makes no difference at all whether you go loud or quiet. The more you loop, the more aggressive you start becoming, almost turning into a mass murdering maniac. You, just like Colt, start to feel desperate because the loop keeps repeating itself over and over again. Just like Colt, you get more and more annoyed with the situation and all these Eternalists start pissing you the fuck off because you keep killing them and keep stabbing them, yet these fucking assholes keep coming back. Deathloop is the perfect mass murdering simulator as it doesn't judge you. There is no police system, there is no chaos system to show how you being a psycho might have a negative impact on the world. No character will be preaching moral lessons to you, and no murder you commit will matter since all these characters will loop again and come back to life. Deathloop perfectly captures the madness of a time loop, mixed with a decent, albeit a bit cryptic story and a fantastically designed world. It's not as deep or layered as the Dishonored games, but if you are a fan of Bioshock or Dishonored, you will feel right at home here. It even uses most of the same controls as in Dishonored. The art direction will be beautifully accompanying you through your journey of mass murdering madness and insanity.